Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Perpetual Improvement Lessons and Strategies from Industry Leaders. My name is Michelle Eisenberg, and I am a program assistant here at the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the NASDAQ Center is a nonprofit building a better path for entrepreneurs worldwide by improving inclusion, access, and knowledge in entrepreneurship. So as you will see in the chat in a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So definitely make sure to check out those links and resources in the chat. And then just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. First, let us know where you are dialing in from in the chat. We always love to connect. And second, we are going to open up for live Q&A at the end of the event. So please make sure to submit your questions for us in that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation, and we will try our best to get to all of them. And of course, none of what we do could be possible at the center without all of the amazing support from our sponsors, including NASDAQ, Lehigh University, BMO, Airbnb, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, BPM, and HubSpot for Startups. We are humbled by their contributions and hope you are grateful too. And so before we get started, we always like to launch a couple polls, step back, see how everyone in the room is doing today. This first one is going to ask, how are you feeling? Fearful, anxious, surviving, or optimistic? And I'll give it just a couple moments for folks to submit a response here. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for joining, everyone. All right, I'll give it just a couple more moments here. Awesome. All right, I'm going to end this poll. Share these results. Awesome. Looks like optimism is coming up in the lead, but we do have a bit of feelings of survival in the audience as well. So hopefully some of our conversation today will be helpful for those feelings. So I'm going to stop sharing this poll and launch that second poll. What is keeping you up at night? Finance, sales, marketing, scale, pivot, team, or surviving? And this one just helps us understand your current needs as an entrepreneur so we can ensure that we are producing meaningful programs and resources for all of you. So give it just a couple more moments there. Awesome. We got folks from DC, Colorado, New York, Washington State, Canada. Welcome, welcome, everyone. So great to have you all joining in with us. All right, I'll give it just a moment longer. Awesome. San Mateo, welcome, welcome. All right, I'm going to end this poll and share these results. All right, looks like scale coming up in the lead, but we got needs all across the board. So thank you all for participating. I'm going to stop sharing this poll. And without any further delay, please join me in welcoming back our special guest, Mike Miles, mentor in residence and faculty lecturer at the University of Arizona Eller College of Management. Mike, it is such a pleasure to have you back here with us. We're super excited for this one, and I'm going to hand it right over to you.
Great. Good morning and afternoon, evening, everybody. Let me make sure I'm sharing my screen correctly before we get started. Am I sharing the full slide deck, Michelle?
Looks great.
Okay, fantastic. I did it the first time. Well, again, good morning. I'm excited to share some thoughts with everybody around perpetual improvement. It's kind of a glossy name for operational excellence, and operational excellence has been really top of mind for me for the last 6 months or so. I started supporting a startup that I've been involved in for a number of years, but in January, because they had raised about 7 digits of financing and are in the process of raising 8 digits more financing. They needed some help kind of with operations, operational improvement, their ability to scale and support more customers. And so For the last 6 months, that's really been my focus area, at least in particular with this startup that I'm focusing on. I want to just give you a little bit more background about myself as we get started here. So none of this stuff really matters, except to say that even in my role as a general manager at Microsoft, I'm on the board of an amazing organization based in Boulder, Colorado called the Watson Institute. They're a social entrepreneurship accelerator. I do a lot of different things with entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship, and one common thread across all those activities really is the role that operations plays and operational excellence plays in the success of most early stage companies, and even big companies that we'll talk about here in just a second as well. My LinkedIn profile is there, but at the end of the slide deck, I also have a QR code. I'd love for anybody that is interested to reach out to me on LinkedIn, share what you're working on. If it makes sense, I'm happy to jump on a call and just hear more about some of your challenges and offer some advice if you think that's valuable. So please reach out, everybody. I'd love to hear from all of you. So the first question is, what is operational excellence? And since this is a webinar, there's not much of a chance for you to contribute your own thoughts. So I'll just give you a couple seconds to think about that. Before I respond kind of with my own answer, and that is that operational excellence is really the execution of your business strategy and making that more consistent and reliable than the competition. As we'll see in a few minutes, I really think that operational excellence is one of the key ways that many companies, and maybe many big companies that you've all heard of, have become successful. It's not because they're out innovating the competition per se. It's not because they're out marketing the competition. It's really because they're out executing the competition. And I think that pattern for many of you is going to become very important in your own early stage company's success. Not just can you build a product that customers love, but can you execute supply, manufacturing, and distribution of that product? To do that, you'll of course have to keep your operational risk low, your operating costs low, and so forth. And we'll touch on a few of those things as we go through this conversation. What are some of the key aspects of operational excellence that I think you need to think about? The first thing is efficiency. So one of the things that we'll talk about here in a few minutes is just how do you come up with metrics that help you measure either capacity or throughput. Those are typically the dimensions of efficiency that people care about. So how do you do that? How do you become more efficient as an organization where you're able to do more with less? The second thing is you want to become efficient, but you don't want to do it when you're compromising quality. So how do you maintain your quality at the same time you're driving efficiency? The third thing is, as you're looking to improve your operational excellence, you want to do it in a way that's focused on your most important business goals. Every one of your businesses, I think, has a myriad of goals. Not all of them are created equal. Not all of your business goals, I would say, are equally important. And so how do you select operational excellence metrics that really help you drive the business forward? You don't need to have metrics for everything. What you want to have is a small set of metrics that you think are most impactful to your business. And then the last thing that we'll touch on is how do you just stay in this cycle of continuing to improve? It's more of a journey than a destination, and I'll talk about that in just a second as well. Operational excellence, lastly, touches on three different things that I think are important for any startup organization, and indeed any big organization as well. The first thing is product market fit. We'll talk about product market fit here in just a second. I'll show you how operational excellence fits in the context of product market fit. Financial performance, of course, because operational excellence can help you reduce your costs. And then lastly, if you're able to keep your cost structure lower than the competition, that will give you a distinct competitive advantage. And so if you're wondering why did I join this webinar when I have all these other things that I could be focusing on to get my product off the ground or help improve the success of my company, if you care about your product market fit, financial performance, and competitive advantage, I think those are three important reasons why you should, why I hope that you're glad you plugged into today's webinar. All of you, I hope, have seen this business model canvas. The way I think about the business model canvas is I think like many of you, it's a very easy tool to let you prototype and play with the structure of your business, playing with your value proposition and relationship with customers and your key partners and your revenue streams and so forth. Lots of opportunity for you to put post-it notes all over your business model canvas and play with different ideas as you're evolving your business. The idea or the goal behind business model canvas, though, really is to help you achieve product market fit. Right, so it's not just that you can put sticky notes on a piece of paper in what is it, 9 different categories or something. It really is designed to help you get closer and closer and closer to product market fit. And because of that, I break the business model canvas down into 3 big areas. One is desirability. So are you building a product that is desirable to your customers? So much so that they're adopting it and your retention is high, they're sharing the amazing product that you're delivering to them with others and so forth. So is your product desirable? The second thing is your product feasible to build, to source and build and distribute and support? And then lastly, is it viable? Can you make money from that? Can you build a product that customers love, that you can build, distribute, and support? And can you make money from? That's how I think about product market fit. And product market fit, as I mentioned, is one of the key goals behind the business model canvas. So if you think about just the feasibility quadrant, remember the feasibility is in the upper left of the business model canvas. So you think about just that section for a second. What you're really trying to do with your operations is maximize your value while you're minimizing your cost. And cost comes in a variety of currencies. It's not just money, but also your time. It could be materials and so forth. So when you're thinking about cost, I don't want you to think just about money. I want you to think of any resource, any scarce resource that your company depends on, whether that's money, time, materials, etc., talent, perhaps. What you're trying to do through your operations is maximize your customer value and value to the business, but at the same time, you're minimizing your cost of performing those key activities. And again, cost could be any currency, not just money, but any currency that your business depends on. Many of you have seen this idea called the value stick. The idea behind the value stick is the gray area between price and cost. That's your company's margin, right? If you subtract your cost from your price, that's the profit that your company is making. In this case, it's kind of modeled as a per unit cost. And so it's probably gross revenue instead of bottom line. So it doesn't take into account maybe SG&A and so forth. But right now, let's just consider the difference between price and cost. You can, of course, increase your price. Any company can increase their price. If you increase it above your customer's willingness to pay, of course, customers are not going to pay for that product. And so to increase your price, almost always you need to increase the value or your customer's willingness to pay. So price you can increase, but only to the extent that you butt up against willingness to pay. On the lower end, on cost, cost is something that your operational excellence can help drive lower. And so oftentimes what you'll see is established companies, their price is pretty fixed. They can slowly, incrementally increase their customers' willingness to pay and therefore increase their price. But in general, once companies are established, and especially once competition enters the market, the way you're going to drive margin in general is by lowering cost. And the way you're going to lower cost in general is by improving your operational excellence. And so one important way for you to think about your operational excellence is that's what's going to help drive your profitability in the long term. Maybe not in the short term, but certainly in the long term. So I mentioned that operational excellence is much more of a journey than a destination. There's an amazing book, and I don't get any royalties from advertising this book, but there's a book written by Chip and Dan Heath, two brothers. They've written a bunch of other books that you're probably familiar with as well. But the book that I'm referring to now is a book called Switch. And Switch is really about change management. Change management is one of the key aspects of operational excellence. The reason I like this book so much, especially in the context of today's webinar, is that it really talks about how operational excellence is that journey and is not a destination. And so one metaphor that Dan and Chip Heath used in their book is the idea, or this metaphor around the elephant and the rider and the path. So in this metaphor, the rider, that's usually the somebody who has a C title in the organization, the CFO, the CEO, the COO. And their job is to kind of rationally think about where the company is going. Like, what is our business objective? That's the goal of the rider. Organizing structuring the organization around achieving that goal, making sure the right talent is deployed in the right areas to achieve that goal, and so forth. But rationally thinking about the company's goal and what's needed in order to achieve that goal. The elephant kind of represents the emotional mind. So those are things like culture and motivation and drive of the company. So it's not enough for the CEO to say, look, that's our goal and I've hired the right people. Now you need to go achieve that goal. But the CEO also needs to be the elephant in some cases and drive vision and excitement and motivation around achieving that goal. But it's not just hiring people and motivating the team. The last thing that's included in this metaphor that I thought was so enlightening is the path. So that's the environment. The environment in the organization represents processes and systems and metrics and so forth. That's the operations. So without those three components, the logical plan, the motivation of the team, and the operational excellence, the metrics and the processes underneath that, your company is likely going to stall. And so the power behind this metaphor, I think, is really to think through those three things when you're thinking about what it's going to take for your company to be successful. I have a reference to this book and then three others at the end of this discussion. So stay tuned for that. I want you to reflect for a second on what makes Starbucks, IKEA, and Amazon successful. Now, you probably can guess that because this webinar is focused on operational excellence, it's easy to guess operational excellence makes these three companies successful. And indeed, that's one of the reasons that they are successful. But double click a little bit on the topic of operational excellence. What does Starbucks do specifically in their operations to make them successful? Same question with IKEA and Amazon. So just think about that for about 15 or 20 seconds while I have a sip of coffee. So what makes them successful, at least in my mind, is their extraordinarily efficient sourcing, manufacturing, distribution, and support. All three of those companies, I'm sure all three of you know those companies in pretty good detail. So you realize that Starbucks, among other things, their supply chain management is second to none. Their ability to source coffee, ethically source coffee, but source coffee from many places around the world and distribute it to all of their locations around the world is a phenomenal feat. Any company would love to have Starbucks supply chain. To do that cost effectively is what makes that supply chain for Starbucks a competitive advantage. If you think about Starbucks, of course, their advanced logistics, ignoring the perhaps waste and consumption challenges with Amazon for a second, you can order many products on Amazon that get delivered later this afternoon. I'm not saying you should, but their distribution channel, similar to Starbucks supply chain, is second to none. You can order a product on Amazon, have it delivered this afternoon in many, many cases. The second thing that Amazon is really known for is their continuous improvement. Their margin in their store is not very high. And so for Amazon to become more profitable, they're talking about percentages of percentages in terms of their operational improvement. They look to squeeze every dollar out of their operations whenever possible. The last company I want to talk about is IKEA. IKEA has done a number of amazing things. The three things that most people realize about IKEA is their flat pack furniture. The reason they deliver the flat pack, of course, is because they realized that as they were distributing furniture to their locations around the world, they were mostly shipping air if the furniture was assembled. And so they realized they can get a lot more furniture in the truck and reduce their cost of distribution if they flat pack their furniture. And so they came up with this flat packing process. That's one of the things they're most famous for, of course. The second thing, though, that not many people realize is they do a lot of their own manufacturing and sourcing in-house. And so they will license a design from one of the furniture artisans that they partner with, but then they will take over the manufacturing in-house because they realize they can develop that furniture at scale a lot more cost efficiently than their suppliers can. So the suppliers get license revenue from the design of the furniture, but they actually generally don't make margin on the sale of the furniture because, like I said, IKEA does that in-house. And the last thing that you probably realize if you ever go to an IKEA is there's very few sales staff walking the floor. You can kind of meander through an IKEA. Everything is accessible. You can sit on the couch. You can look through the pictures. You can pick up the silverware, do whatever. There are very few customer service employees that are roaming through Starbucks location. And that's by design. Everything in that store is meant to be self-service, and that dramatically, of course, lowers their cost. So those are three big companies who, they're not necessarily raising their prices to drive their margin, though I would argue Starbucks in some cases has driven or increased their prices. Mostly what they're doing to increase their profit margin is focusing on operational efficiency. I'm going to skip this slide just in interest of time and focus more on this slide, which I think does a better job telling the story around where you can focus on your operational excellence. So if you think about Porter's value chain, I'm sure most of you have seen this model. The idea behind Porter's value chain is it breaks down your company's value add by taking your suppliers, your manufacturing process, your distribution process, maybe your sales process and your support process, and kind of connects them together in a model that lets you holistically think about the moving parts of your business. This is a different way to think about the upper left-hand corner of the business model canvas. But if you think about those areas, acquiring resources, manufacturing, distribution, and so forth, I'm sure all of you can think of ways that you can make your own operations more efficient in those areas. Now, maybe all of those areas are not equally important. If you're a software development shop acquiring resources, your resources that you're acquiring, if you're building software these days, are likely to be cloud hosting costs and so forth. So there's not much you're going to be able to do to reduce those costs. But the manufacturing side, building software, there's a lot that you can do to make your software development process more economical and operational efficient. Developing your own software development lifecycle, making sure your backlog management is well-tuned and so forth. So for software development companies, some of these things may not make sense. And indeed, for all of your companies, you might be spending more of your time and energy in any one of these 5 boxes than the others. That's where you should be spending your effort around operational excellence, is in whatever box you think is taking the most time or dollars from your company. I want to talk now about 3 considerations for metrics. One of the things that you're going to do to improve your operations is to select metrics that you're going to use to evaluate how much progress you're making around your operational improvement efforts, or your operational efficiency or operational excellence improvements. So I want to talk about 3 things related to that for just a second. The first thing that I want to talk about is making data-driven decisions. I think we all have an intrinsic understanding of our business. We all have an intuition around where the majority of the costs are coming from, or where most of the inefficiencies are coming from, or maybe what's causing customers not to be satisfied with the product as much as we want them to be. I think that intuition works probably initially. Over time, you're going to want to invest in ways to measure the impact that your operational efficiency efforts are making. And I'll give you some examples in a couple slides about why that's true. But in the meantime, the goals around making data-driven decisions, the first is just being objective. So making sure your decisions are based on empirical evidence rather than gut feelings over time is going to be, I think, critically important in order for you to become an operationally excellent organization. The second thing is, is about improved accuracy and precision. As I mentioned, Amazon, not Starbucks, sorry, Amazon, their margins on their store are not very big. Their per unit margins when they sell you a blender or a pair of socks or a book, they don't make much on a per unit basis. And so their ability to reduce cost by fractions of fractions in those transactions is what makes them successful. If your company is similar, where your margins are not high, you're going to need metrics that help you improve your accuracy and precision around the operational improvements that you're making in your company. So data is the only way to do that. Gut feel, you can't get the accuracy and precision that I think you need. There's no way that gut feel in Amazon is going to help them reduce their cost fractions upon fractions. And then lastly, of course, you're going to want to put your resources on the biggest cost reduction or operational improvement initiatives. And so that data can help you decide, gosh, if we put more of our resources on this effort, we can reduce our cost by 3%. We put them over on this effort, we can reduce our cost by 2%. Where should we put them? Of course, on the efforts that are going to reduce our costs by 3%. So having making data-driven decisions allows you to also allocate your resources most cost effectively as well. The next thing I want to talk about with regards to metrics is selecting operational metrics that I think need to fit 5 criteria. The first thing, obviously, is aligning with business goals. There's a little bit of a trick to that in that maybe most of your organizations have 10 or 12 business goals. You probably have a lot of goals. Not all of those goals are equally important. And your operational metrics, of course, should align with your most important business goals. Maybe not all of your goals, but certainly the most important ones. So some examples of that: customer satisfaction might be business goal, revenue growth might be business goal, quality improvement or cost reduction, those all might be business goals that your company is currently focused on. The next thing when you're selecting these metrics, are they relevant and clear? So are they focused on making improvements around the right business goals? Are they clear to the employees so when they see an improvement in that metric, it's obvious to them that the metric is moving in the right direction? The third thing is, are they actually measurable? There's a trick to, or sometimes there's a trap to coming up with metrics that ideally we would love to be able to measure X, but we don't have the data or we can't define the metric exactly and so forth. And so that metric is fairly useless if you can't figure out a way to objectively measure your progress. And so can you actually measure it would be the third criteria. Does it help you determine what actions to take to improve that metric? So is that metric actionable would be the fourth consideration. And then lastly, are they balanced? So I would argue that you need to oftentimes have not only a metric, but what I would consider a constraining metric. And my most useful example of that is you want to reduce call time for support, of course, because every time that your support agents are on the phone costs money. But you don't want to do that to the point that it's eroding your customer satisfaction. You don't want your customer service agents to pick the phone and say goodbye right away and hang up the phone, because of course your customers are not going to be satisfied. And so what you need oftentimes is a balance of 2 metrics in order to make sure that you're making the right decisions. Of course, in my example, you want to reduce customer hold times. Maybe you can do that by automating the most easy to answer customer support calls, or training your support agents to be more efficient on the phone, those kinds of things. But you certainly don't want to reduce call times to the point where customers are churning off of your product, or I'm sorry, becoming less satisfied and eventually churning off of your product. So when you think about metrics, you generally want them to be balanced against something. You're gonna focus on call times, but not to the extent that you're voting customer satisfaction, as my example talks about. Then the last thing I want to talk about with regards to selecting metrics is the difference between output and outcome. I think oftentimes we think about the metrics that are easy to measure. Those are output generally. So output metrics. I think I screwed up this slide a little bit, so I'll talk you through it. So output metrics typically measure the short-term or intermediate changes that you're making. So examples of output metrics would be the number of app downloads that you have, or maybe your customer retention, like a customer is on our product before they churn for 3 months or 12 months or 15 months. Those are output metrics. What you care about more, I think, is outcome metrics. So outcome metrics are typically things that measure more business goals, not the results of business tactics. So for customer retention, of course, you want your customers to stick around your product longer, but why do you want that? Well, you want that because it's easier to retain a customer than to acquire a customer. And so if you can retain your customers for longer, that will actually have a disproportionate impact on your revenue as opposed to acquiring more customers. And so outcome metrics kind of measure more strategic goals as opposed to tactics that your company's invested in. So I screwed up this slide a little bit. I hope that explanation was clear. If not, we can talk about it in Q&A. Lastly, before we get into some light bulbs that I want to share with you, I think there's 5 steps for you to get started. If you're not started yet on improving your own organization's operational excellence, I think there's 5 things that you can do to get started. These are all manageable, achievable by everybody on this call. So I'm hoping that these will help demystify and reduce the sense maybe of being overwhelmed. The first thing, of course, is define your operational goals. They could be things like reducing your cost of goods sold, or increasing customer retention, or increasing throughput of a particular step in your manufacturing process. So define what your goals are, I think is the very first thing. Don't worry about metrics just yet, but think about what you're trying to do operationally. What are your goals? What are your operational goals? The second thing I think is equally, maybe even more important, and that is creating a culture of excitement around operational excellence. If every employee knows that it's part of their role to make things more efficient, you'll get a lot more creativity and energy and support from your organization. The things that you need to focus on, I think, are encouraging growth mindset. Encouraging growth mindset means that you're rewarding your employees for learning from their mistakes. So if an employee says, look, I didn't achieve this goal, but here's the 5 things I learned, and I'll get even closer to achieving the goal next time because of these learnings, that's the behavior, that's the culture that I think you're going to want to invest in as a company. The third thing is make sure that your operational excellence progress, you're reviewing that as part of your rhythm of business. I'm sure all of you have some daily, weekly, maybe monthly rhythm of your business where you're meeting as a leadership team talking about metrics or goals or the competition or challenges that the organization is having. Make sure that operational excellence and your operational scorecard is part of that rhythm of business. The fourth thing is engage everyone. Everybody in the company can think of ways to become more operationally effective. So you're going to want to harness the entire mental horsepower of your organization. And so make sure that everybody in the company knows and has the ability to contribute ideas to make the organization more effective and efficient. And then lastly, of course, to celebrate progress. If you make a significant impact on a goal that you feel is important, take a step back and make sure the entire company knows that was a successful, an important milestone, so that it kind of encourages the company to invest in more operational excellence improvement ideas. So those 5 things, pretty simple. Define your goals, reinforce the culture, make sure it's part of your ROB, and engage everyone in the process, and then celebrate progress. Those 5 things are things that I would suggest you do to get going. Now I want to leave you with just 5 quick light bulbs, and then we'll turn it over to Q&A in less than 5 minutes. So light bulbs, things that I think and hope you can take away from this conversation. The first thing is this idea that perfect is the enemy of the good. And some of you have heard this saying before, but the idea is oftentimes we get wrapped up in what's the perfect solution for the company, or what's the perfect way to do this. It takes a lot of effort to get to perfection, but sometimes we let that quest for perfection get in the way of taking incremental steps that will make tomorrow better than today. And so while you can look for perfection, you probably never achieve it in most dimensions that you care about as a company. Don't let that ideal get in the way of making short-term incremental progress toward that goal. So that's light bulb number 1, is don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. Second light bulb is output is not equal to outcome. So again, output generally are easy to measure, like the number of times our app was downloaded from the App Store. That's super easy to measure. Does it tell you how those downloads impacted your business? Not really, because what you really care about is, did somebody convert from your freemium to your premium offer? Or did those customers turn into paying customers that stayed with you in the long term? Was their customer satisfaction high after they downloaded? So really make sure that you can measure output, but output doesn't really measure the progress you're making toward goals. It measures the impact of tactics, but you really want to think about metrics that help you evaluate your progress toward more strategic goals. That's light bulb number 2. Light bulb number 3 is this idea that improvement evolves. You're not going to go from 0 to 60, or if you're living in the metric system, 0 to 100. What you want to think about, first of all, is any given process, if you can make that process first repeatable. And then if you make that process repeatable, then it becomes a little bit more predictable. And then once it's predictable, then you can look for ways to make it more efficient and agile. But if you try to think or try to make improvements in a process that is not repeatable today and just make it more efficient, what you're going to find is that sometimes it goes fast and sometimes it goes slow. And sometimes you make a lot of mistakes and sometimes it's better than others. And so I would encourage you to think about ways to make that process repeatable and then predictable and then agile or efficient. If you skip steps, I think your mileage is definitely going to vary. I have this slide that I'll just hover over. I won't speak to it in detail, but this gives you a little bit more detail on what I mean by repeatability, predictability, and agility. So if you're going to go back and watch this video in the future, here's more details about that. Light bulb number 3. Light bulb number 4 is thinking about why, how, and then what. Start with what. This is a concept that was popularized by a speaker named Simon Sinek. You can go look at his TED Talk called Start With Why on YouTube if you want. But the idea is to think first about why you're trying to improve something. What's the organizational goal that you're looking for? Not start with the things that the steps that you're going to take toward that goal. What is it that you're trying to, why is it that you're trying to improve this process? Usually that why is associated with an organizational or company goal or business goal. Framing the why you're trying to improve things, I think, will oftentimes provide more clarity for yourself and for the company about the importance of the operational excellence initiatives that you're investing in. So start with why and never with what is the fourth light bulb. Again, this gives a little bit more detail, so you can come back and hover over this slide when you rewatch this video, if you ever do. And then lastly, light bulb number 5, before we turn it over to Q&A, is less is more. Amazon, little story. So at Microsoft, my second to last role at Microsoft before I retired, I worked for an amazing Amazon alumni who now is the CTO of Walmart, a guy named Suresh Kumar. So he at Amazon had scorecards that had dozens of metrics. And he would, with his team, review dozens and dozens and dozens of metrics and look for reasons why metrics were improving and reasons why metrics were regressing, and focus his team's effort on making sure that things improved and not regressed. At Amazon, that's important because the margins are not very big. And so you're looking for lots of ways to improve fractions of fractions. At Microsoft, that wasn't the case. So when he came to lead the organization I was working for at Microsoft, he did a great job of just simplifying what we were focused on down to 3. And so those 3 metrics, I think, oriented a lot of the effort of the entire organization around the 3 things that we thought were going to move the business the most, the furthest and the fastest. So you don't need to measure 20 things. If you measured 3 things, most of your improvement, the 80-20 rule, I think, applies. The most of the improvement is going to come from smaller number of things as opposed to a large number of things. Unless you're as operationally efficient as Amazon and your margins are pretty thin. I think less is more. With that, I'm going to stop sharing and we can turn it over to Q&A.
Mike, thank you. Amazing as always. Such an awesome overview. And I think this is, just a process that is super replicable, easily to implement, at whatever stage you're currently at. So thank you so much for the insight. If you are in the audience and you have a question for Mike, make sure to drop it in that Q&A function at the bottom, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. I want to start off because I know we had a couple entrepreneurs curious about real-time data specifically, and you talked about like the importance of data-driven decisions. So especially thinking about entrepreneurs early in their business journey, can you talk a little bit more about like why real-time data is so critical, and how entrepreneurs at that stage can kind of ensure that they're able to access that type of timely information?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and I think for me to give the best answer, I'd love to connect with whoever that entrepreneur is. So reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I can talk about your specific case maybe in a little bit more detail.
Yeah.
I would say a couple of things. I think for most businesses, real-time data, is not as important as having the data in the first place. And so, to get real-time, get to quote real-time data, a lot of times that takes a huge expense, where many of your operational improvements can come from maybe aggregated data that you collect over a week or even over a month.
Right.
So the first thing I would do is question whether you need the real-time data in order to make operational improvements in your organization. So that'd be the first thing. The second thing is, to the extent that real-time data is important for you to make your operational improvements, I think the challenge is going to be that you're going to need to maybe invest in some data analysts that can actually take the noise or the signal from the noise that real-time data often comes with. And so you need to, it's not going to be that your CEO is going to look at this stream of telemetry and be able to divine insights from that will change the course of the company. You're going to need some data analyst, probably, that's going to be able to take, like I said, signal out of that noise. And so I would think about those 2 things. But the first,
Yeah.
maybe the most important thing is really consider whether real time is important for you, given where you are in your organizational journey.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's so great to emphasize, that like it can feel very urgent, but like really thinking strategically about like what data is most critical regardless of whether it's, real time or however you may classify it. So that's awesome, super helpful. We have another entrepreneur here who's kind of at the ideation stage. They don't currently have a product. What advice, would you give kind of at that early stage in terms of just like implementing good practices of operational excellence and continuous improvement, when there's not really that existing product in place?
Yeah, that's a great question. The thing that I would start with is if you go back to product market fit, we talked about product market fit as desirability, feasibility, and viability. I would think about maybe one or two candidate metrics that help you decide how much progress you're making on those dimensions. So
Yeah.
for desirability, maybe it's customer adoption, or it's churn rate, or it's, the opposite of churn rate is retention. Whatever those metrics are, design the decision-making process around the impact against those metrics would be the first thing. I think for you're at a great stage in that you're not encumbered by a bunch of bad decisions that you've already made. And so I think it's a great question, like how do I start thinking about metrics that will help guide my organization now before I end up having to redo a bunch of things. So I'd pick metrics that help you decide, are you getting closer to product market fit around desirability, feasibility, and viability?
Yeah, love that. Awesome. We have another question here. And I think this is really geared around entrepreneurs who might have like a small team, like less than five. I know we have a lot of entrepreneurs kind of in that range. Um, when kind of implementing these processes of continuous improvement, I think there can be like a worry, like for like of the potential of like change fatigue, among team members. And so how can entrepreneurs kind of sustain that, growth mindset long term, so that, that fatigue doesn't necessarily occur?
Yeah, also a great question. I should have 3 cups of coffee, I think, this morning instead of just two. That's a great question as well. Here's how I would think about it. I think if you evaluate your team based on the tasks that they accomplish, I think what happens then is that people tend to lose the forest because they're focused on the trees.
Yeah.
And change is going to happen a lot more frequently if you're focusing them on tasks. If instead you focus them on organizational goals and give them the latitude to develop the tactics and tasks to achieve those goals tend to be more permanent and feel less like they're changing so often. And then they're empowered to, okay, I'm going to experiment on ways that I can improve that goal. Like maybe I'm going to add a new feature that does X, and I'm going to see if that drives retention. Retention being maybe one of the goals I care about. It turns out that feature did nothing about retention. I'm going to go ahead and add another feature and see if that helps drive retention. I
Mhm.
think the change fatigue comes from changes being pushed down or coming from external forces. If they instead kind of control their own destiny by aligning the work they do around driving business goals, I think a lot of that is in their own control, and the change fatigue is going to be less.
Mhm.
Along with that, the sense of empowerment, maybe the idea behind experimentation and so forth, will probably be a lot more frequent.
Yeah, yeah, I love this idea of kind of like driving innovation among your team members and also, kind of reframing it as like, it's not necessarily that like you're completing a function, but you're achieving a goal, and that can mean something in terms of, it can be so meaningful to create impact in the world, and that can bring just like, long-term purpose to one's work. So I love kind of the way that you've kind of framed that and for entrepreneurs to think about. Um, Looking ahead, how do you kind of see, you know, these processes of continuous improvement and this mindset of operational excellence that we see, entrepreneurs across industries beginning to implement. How do you kind of see this evolving over the next 5 years? Just in the future, as technology and AI continue to evolve and just market trends continue to naturally shift. Are there any kind of specific expectations that entrepreneurs might uh, look out for in terms of keeping up to date with processes?
Yeah, so I'll say a couple things with regards to that question. The first thing is it is increasingly easy for startups to launch a product into the market. Organizations like the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center and a bunch of others really democratize this idea around entrepreneurship. And I think that's a great thing. That's a fantastic thing. The impact, I think, to startups is there's a lot more competition because it's a lot easier for companies to look at an idea that they think is successful and enter that market and compete with you. Companies in the long term, I think I hinted at the beginning of the conversation, in the long term, what differentiates a company, helps a company outcompete others is not price, generally not innovation, feature innovation. It's generally innovation around how scalable and efficient their operations are. You don't necessarily have to have the highest price if you can have the lowest cost. And so in order for you to strategically, survive against competition, creating that spread between price and cost is the most important thing. And cost generally is the thing that you have a lot more flexibility on. So that's thing number one is entrepreneurship is great, but that begets more competition. The thing that will differentiate you in the long term is being more operationally efficient. Yeah. The second thing is I didn't mention a lot of kind of popular formal operational excellence methodologies like Six Sigma and so forth. I think for many of us, like the formal methodology is not the thing. For a company like Amazon, they have like black belts and Six Sigma guys, and they really know their stuff when it comes to operational excellence. But that's because they're squeezing, and trying to make very, very fractional improvements across a large volume. For most of us, that's not the case. And so I wouldn't focus too much on becoming a black belt on this or a Six Sigma expert on that. I would really focus on just keeping it super simple. What are the metrics that are aligned to your business goals? How can you empower everybody to make contributions toward those metrics and drive most of your operational improvements that way?
Awesome. Mike, this has been so great. If you had just one key takeaway or piece of wisdom that you wanted to leave with the audience, what would that be?
Wow. I have 17, but I'll try to distill it down to one. And that is, I really think less is more. We covered a lot of stuff today. Start with one metric that you think will help drive your operational efficiency. And maybe you care about your cost of goods sold or your retention or customer satisfaction or whatever. Pick one of those things, orient your operational improvements around that one thing. From that, you can kind of build some muscle memory to scale those operational improvement efforts across other things. But start with one thing. So less is more. I think that fifth light bulb that I shared is probably the thing top of mind for me.
Awesome. Mike, thank you once again for joining us. Always such a pleasure. And we're just so grateful for the insight that you shared today. So thank you. And to our audience, we would love for you to join us again for upcoming webinars, which you can view using that link that's going to be posted in the chat. And thank you all so much for joining us today. We look forward to welcoming you back online with us soon.